Alright, so in today's video we're going to take another look at the Heewing T1-S. I did do a video very briefly about this a week ago where I just did an unboxing and we got to see together what the new aircraft looked like. But that was a very quick look at the aircraft, and today I want to do a much more detailed look and talk about a lot more of the other changes that I didn't originally notice when I did that unboxing video. And also talk about the setup, what it was required of me to actually get the aircraft actually airworthy, and then talk about what it was actually like to fly, and actually just a bit of an overview in a bit more detail about what this new aircraft is like. Now, I've written myself a sort of a list of things to talk about because there are quite a lot of things, and I think the first thing I'm going to talk about is the changes. So I obviously, in my unboxing video, I talked about, the fact that the tail had been redesigned on the Heewing T1-S to be much more like the Heewing T2. Basically, the tail can now be assembled or disassembled without the need for any tools. It's got little buttons for sort of quick release and stuff. That was a really nice change to see on the new Heewing T1-S. But it turns out there's a lot of other changes, and admittedly, a lot of these are quite small changes, but they are still important. So the first one is the fact that the fuselage is now longer. The fuselage is now 3 centimeters longer than the original Heewing T1, which will allow you for a slightly sort of longer battery. And also the wingspan has also been increased as well, and this has been increased by 6 centimeters. So the wingspan is actually quite a bit bigger, which just allows for a sort of slightly longer flight time. Another change. Again, quite a small change, but they've now moved the servos from being underneath the wings to on top of the wings. And the reason why this is a good thing is because the servos underneath the wings means the linkages are under the wings. And sometimes, depending on what you're landing on, the linkages can get damaged. Now, this never actually happened to me, although my friend Joe happened to him on more than one occasion. And I'm guessing it's happened to other people as well, which is why they've decided to move the servos and linkages to the top. So just a good little change. Other changes, very small ones. So the canopies have been redesigned a little bit, and it's an interesting thing to note that when you buy the T1-S, the GPS is installed in the front, which may or may be good depending on what you sort of plan to do with the aircraft. But I've noticed that if you want to take the GPS out the front, the rear canopy has actually got a little mounting hole kind of built into it now, and the GPS unit will perfectly fit in there. So if you don't want it in the front, you can move it to the back. So that's another small change. Also, I think I may have mentioned this in my video, I can't remember or not, but in the fuselage at the front, there's now like a little foam block there. I'm guessing that's there just to stop the battery from sliding forwards if you have a bit of an impact on landing. So that's just a small change. And also underneath the fuselage, so on the old Heewing T1, there used to be like a little mounting point for putting like a little Insta-Go camera or like a little small action camera. They've now got rid of that, so the entire bottom of the fuselage is now completely smooth. And the only other change, which is quite a nice change though, is the fact that they've made the foam better as well. I mean, there was nothing wrong with the foam on the original Heewing T1, but it's now an even denser foam. It's got like a nice sort of shiny gloss to it, so it's just a much tougher, much nicer foam has been used for building the aircraft. So yeah, in general, just lots of sort of small changes. The main one is, as I said in my previous video, is the tail's been redesigned, so no need for tools anymore. And obviously one of the selling points of this aircraft as well is the fact that it now comes in the carry case, which I absolutely love. Now, let's now talk a little bit about the build of the aircraft. So when it first arrives to you, there are a few things that you need to do. You need to install the linkages for the ailerons and also the elevator. It literally takes like 5 minutes. It was very easy to do. Just make sure that the aircraft is powered up and level when you do it, so you know how to adjust them. So that was very easy to do. And also I had to install the canopy handle. I had to just clip that into the main canopy. And obviously I also needed to install the props. Now those are the main things that needed to be done to get the aircraft sort of physically airworthy. But obviously I wanted to add FPV to the aircraft, so I did have to do a little bit of modification. Now, one thing that I don't like about any of the Heewing T1s is the fact that the camera mount in the front, in the foam, is designed for a 14mm camera. Now, I don't own any 14mm cameras. I mean, my walk style stuff, that's all bigger cameras, and even most of my analog stuff is bigger cameras. So for that reason, I had to modify the front of the fuselage. I had to cut a section out And I then installed a 3D printed mount that I designed myself to allow me to use bigger cameras. And I did the exact same thing on my old Heewing T1 as well, and I think a lot of people do that as well. So just something to be mindful of, that if you've got a camera that's bigger than 14mm, you're going to have to cut a section out of the front of the aircraft. Now, for this specific build, I just used analog FPV. That's literally just because that's what I had laying around. I didn't have any walk-snail stuff going spare. So in addition to putting the camera in the front, obviously I needed someone to put the video transmitter, and for this build I chose to put the video transmitter in the rear canopy. So like I said, you could put the GPS there, but I chose instead to put my video transmitter there because that actually almost perfectly fit as well. Just had to cut a little bit of the foam away to install the video transmitter, the aerial, and I also just added a little heatsink just because I had one laying around, just to make it, make sure the VTX got a little bit of cooling. So yeah, I did that, and then the only other thing I did, I mean, this is entirely optional, you don't need to do this, but rather than use the stock plywood battery trays that you can screw in to the inside of the fuselage, I just 3D printed my own. That was mostly just for my own OCD. It helped to hide some of the wires in the fuselage, just looked a little bit tidier, so I did do that. So yeah, that's everything that was required to get the aircraft built and ready to fly. But let's now talk about the programming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little graphic thing up screen, and this is going to show you all of the the programming steps and parameters that needed to be done to get the Heewing T1-S actually ready to fly. And you'll notice that this is all done in different colors. So all of the stuff that you're seeing here in green, these are all of the programming parameters that were already done, already installed on the flight controller when it arrived to me. And this is mostly stuff, the complicated stuff like setting up the VTOL things and like the clever mixing and stuff. All of that had been done already, which is obviously a very, very good thing to see. Saves you having to do it yourself. Now, like I said, that's the stuff in green. Now, the stuff that's in orange, these are things that had been done at the factory. However, they weren't right, or at least they weren't right for my specific setup. This may change for you. Some of this stuff may be right. I mean, an example is if we look at the RC mapping stuff, my radio uses the TAER protocol, so therefore these numbers were wrong. But if you're using a different protocol, I think this may be AETR, I'm not sure, that might be right for you. But certainly that is something that I had to change. And yeah, all of the other stuff you see in orange, these are things that I had to tweak. They were done, but they just needed to be modified. Now, the other stuff, all the stuff that's in grey, these are all the things that hadn't been done. And these are things that, you would probably be expected to do anyway. So, I mean, obviously, you've got the accelerometer calibration, the compass calibration. Obviously, those are things that, you would have to do anyway. But other things like the radio calibration, I had to reverse the pitch axis. Again, that might just be because of my radio. Your radio might not require that, but I did have to reverse the pitch. And also in the servo outputs, I had to reverse the aileron, because otherwise I found if the aircraft was hovering and I told it to move forwards, it went backwards and vice versa. So that's something that you may or may not need to change as well. But other things, so you'll see that I've got a section there for the dead zone for channels 2, 3, and 4. By default, they were all set to 0, and that's a very, very bad thing, because it means that unless your sticks are absolutely perfectly level or perfectly straight and centered, you get an error when you try to launch, basically saying sticks not centered. And it's basically impossible to get those sticks set to 0. So I just changed them to 30, which is the RD Pilot's default. So somebody at Heewing must have changed that to 0, and I don't know why they did. But I just changed them to 30 just to get around that. Other thing I changed, so RC5 option. So that's saying on your radio, I want the switch on channel 5. I want that to be my arm switch. So I set that to 153. Flight mode channel, that was already set to 8, but I've changed it to 6. So, the switch assigned to channel 6 on my radio, that now does my flight modes. And it was good to see that the flight modes were correctly already set by Heewing, so that's good. And then the RC7 option, which I've set to 171, that basically allows you to use switch number 7 on your radio to calibrate the compass. It's just useful if you're in the field, say for some reason the compass calibration is wrong, you can just press that button and then you can do that. And then the only other thing that you'll see there in grey is the VTX stuff. Again, because I was using a analog VTX, I had to just program in a couple of settings. These basically just allow me to use Mission Planner to configure the VTX rather than have to press the button on the VTX to set the channel and the power and the band and stuff. So that is that. Now, obviously, a lot of you guys watching this will probably be using HD FPV as opposed to using analog like I did. And what I'll do is I'll put on screen the sort of the parameters that you need to plug in into Mission Planner if you want to use HD. It's probably going to be the same for DJI and Walks now, and sort of maybe HD0. Whatever information I can find, I'll put it on the screen there, and then you can kind of copy that and put it into Mission Planner instead of the analog stuff. And then that should get your aircraft up and running with HD FPV. But yeah, if you buy a Heewing T1-S, or even just the original Heewing T1 VTOL, if you just copy these settings, put them straight onto the flight controller, it should work. These are the settings that I used, and yeah, it worked absolutely great. And that now brings me on to sort of talking about, actually flying the aircraft. So I've only had one opportunity to fly the aircraft so far, and that's just because the weather here hasn't been great. But the flight that I did, it went absolutely perfect. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But the first thing is just building the aircraft in the field. Obviously, if you take it there in the case. It took me just under 1 minute and 30 seconds to assemble the aircraft, and that wasn't even with me particularly rushing. So it's a very, very quick aircraft to just assemble in the field, and it's not complicated in the slightest. And then, for the flight, I used a 3000 milliamp 4S lithium ion battery, and I found if I just push that to the front of the fuselage, that absolutely perfectly balanced the CG. Now, in the various coding parameters I showed you there, I did notice that Heewing have changed a couple of those settings from what was on the original Heewing T1 VTOL. They've changed some settings to speed up the transition speed. So obviously, if you take the aircraft up in a hover, press the button to then transition into fixed wing mode. It used to take 4 or 5 seconds transition. Now I think they sped that up to, I think it's about 3 seconds. If I'm wrong, I'll put it on the screen. But they sped up how quickly the transition happens. And I was a little bit nervous whether that was going to work very well or be bumpy or whatever. But as you can see from this footage here, it just transitioned perfectly. And it was a little bit of a windy day the day I did this as well. But yeah, absolutely fine. Just transitioned smooth. So it's nice to see that they've tweaked and refined those parameters a little bit, just to kind of refine things and make it just work a little bit better. And then once the aircraft was transitioned to fixed wing mode, it just flew absolutely beautifully. Like I said, it was a little bit of a windy day, but you wouldn't really know it. The aircraft just kind of carved through absolutely fine. One thing I did notice is the aircraft, it really wants to climb. Once you transition to fixed wing mode, you want to back that throttle off a lot, because otherwise, just by default, it wants to climb and climb and climb, and it wants to climb really quickly as well. With the stock settings, so fixed wing mode is fly by wire A. So in that mode, you can't do any rolls or loops or anything. And if you want to do that, all you've got to do is change what that second flight mode is. But yeah, it just flew beautifully in fixed wing mode. And then at the end of the flight, I wanted to test landing and simultaneously test return to home. So yeah, I just put the aircraft into return to home whilst it was a distance away. The aircraft immediately turned around, sort of flew back towards home as a fixed wing. When it then got nearby, it transitioned into sort of the VTOL mode, and it did that reasonably smoothly. Sometimes you find the aircraft kind of bounces around and almost looks like it's going to fall out of the sky, but on this occasion it didn't. Transitioned to VTOL very nicely. And the aircraft then started to descend and come down for landing. It was a little bit inaccurate. I took off from a little picnic table, so I wanted the aircraft to land on the picnic table, and it was probably about half a meter away from the picnic table was coming down. But one of the various parameters that I put into the coding when doing the aircraft was the landing reposition. So that basically means as the aircraft's coming down, if it's not quite in the right place, you can just use your sticks to sort of maneuver the aircraft back into where you want it. And then the aircraft just landed perfectly. The only thing you need to remember to do is once the aircraft has landed, just bring the throttle to 0. And if you do that, the aircraft will disarm. If you don't bring the throttle to 0, it will just sit there with the motors idling. That was an absolutely perfect little flight. And on that day, I then did do a second flight just immediately after that. And in that one, I just wanted to see how quickly could I take the aircraft off and transition. So rather than sort of do it slowly, I just did a very quick takeoff. I think I went up to like 30 meters and then instantly flicked the switch. And even then, just nice quick transition straight into fixed wing mode with absolutely no issues. And then at the end of that flight, I then manually landed the aircraft rather than rely on return home. And that also worked absolutely perfectly. And So yeah, and then at the end of the flight, I then just measured how long does it take to disassemble the aircraft and put it back in the box, and that was actually even quicker. I think it was about 1 minute and 5 seconds to fully dismantle the entire aircraft, put it back in the box, ready for transportation back home. So I guess it's another point in the video where I just kind of give you a little bit of a conclusion. And basically, I've got nothing but good things to say about it. Now, I know that it's very annoying when you see YouTubers and they get sent stuff for free and then they instantly say, oh, it was amazing. But hopefully, over time, I've sort of built up a bit of a reputation of being an honest reviewer. I mean, last week I literally did the review of the Hawkeye FPV HD system, and I very clearly said in that, even though it was sent to me for free, it was no good. So hopefully you'll take my word for it when I say that, actually, this new Heewing T1-S, very good aircraft. If you've ever owned one of the any of the other Heewing T1s or the original Heewing T1 VTOL, it is a very, very similar aircraft. And, would I sort of say that if you've already got a Heewing T1 VTOL, is it worth you, buying this new one? In terms of the way it flies, there's probably not really much of a difference. I mean, if you want it to just sort of transition a little bit nicely, you can just copy the parameters that I've already showed you on the screen here, and that will speed it up a little bit. But in terms of the actual physical aircraft, unless you sort of you really want the carry case for easy transportation, and maybe you want slightly longer flight times with the slightly bigger wings, I wouldn't really say there's any real need to upgrade to the Heewing T1-S. But certainly if you're new to sort of VTOLs, you've never owned one before, and you're sort of thinking of getting one, I would absolutely say Heewing T1-S, very good aircraft for that. It's a very stable aircraft. It's very, very easy to fly. In terms of setting up the sort of the program and parameters, I know that can seem a little bit intimidating, but actually once you get your head around it, it's not too bad. And like I said, you can mostly just copy what I've put on the screen. And I think the only sort of thing that I would sort of criticize about the Heewing T1-S is I do wish that they had made the tail the same as the Heewing T2, so that there's no wires whatsoever. It's nice that you can attach the tail assembly to the tail boom with no tools and there's no wires or anything. But it does suck that you still need to feed the wires from the other end of the tail boom into the fuselage and then manually plug them in. It's not a big deal. It literally takes you like 20 seconds, but it would be nice if it was the same as a Heewing T2 where there's no wires and literally just when you plug it in, an electrical connection is made immediately. That would have been a really nice thing to see. Now, the only thing I just want to quickly mention is that I did find that when I first got this aircraft, when I was putting it back in the box, I got a bit confused about which wing went where. On the box, it does say, it labels the slots for left wing and right wing, but it's hard to know which one's left or right. Obviously, it depends which way you look at the aircraft. But I did actually realise that actually on the nacelles for the wings, it actually does have the L and the R on there. So if you have one of these aircraft and you're trying to work out which wing goes in which slot, that's how you do it. You just look at the label on the nacelle, tells you how to go in. So yeah, that's basically my mini review of the new Heewing T1-S VTOL aircraft. Ultimately, I think it's a very, very nice aircraft. And I should also point out as well, I didn't mention this in my previous video, but there's actually two versions of the Heewing T1-S. So obviously there's the VTOL version, which is what I've got here, but there's also just a standard twin motor version that's available as well. So not VTOL, just a normal one like the original Heewing T1. Still has the same sort of like design changes, like the tail and the servos and things like that. So if you want a new Heewing T1 but you don't want the VTOL version, it's worth noting that that exists as well. And I can't remember off the top of my head how much these cost, but I'll put the price for both versions down below. But if I remember rightly, they're not especially expensive, and considering what you get for the money, I think it's a very good deal. I have nothing but praise for Heewing aircraft. I've owned, I think, all of them over the last couple of years. Every aircraft they've ever made, I think I've owned them and I've reviewed them, and they've all been very, very good aircraft. So anyway, I've basically run out of things to say now. So as always, if you enjoyed watching this video, please do give it a like down below, because it does actually genuinely really help. And yeah, I guess I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, guys.